The idea of an innocent prisoner calmly, without a quiver, asking her reluctant lawyer if she would be killed by hanging or beheading is a baffling idea. Further, the idea of a 21-year-old woman being willing to accept death even though she only peacefully spoke out against her government is even more baffling. This shocking young woman was Sophie Scholl, an active member of the anti-Nazi group called the White Rose. Two other members of the White Rose were faced with the same predicament as Sophie. These two members were Hans Scholl, her brother, and Christoph Probst. Clearly there was a reason that these three young adults were willing to die for their actions against the ruling regime in Germany, the Nazis. In 1943, Hitler's Nazi regime was much like the grand finale of a fireworks show. It was seemingly the most grand and powerful thing anyone had ever seen, yet it was beginning to burn out and fall from the sky. Walter C. Langer accurately prophesied that after the war, quote, Hitler will go down in history as the most worshipped and most despised man the world has ever known, unquote. It was a bold comment, considering that during this time, Hitler, who was alive, claimed that he was, quote, the greatest German of all time, unquote. During World War II, while the propaganda put forward by Hitler and the Nazis was accepted by the majority of the public, there were those who stood in opposition to the fascist regime, particularly the youth-led White Rose group. Firstly, who was Hitler? And secondly, how did Hitler become so mighty and fascinating, yet at the same time so detested and disowned by the public? Part of Hitler's character can be blamed on his family life. Hitler's relationships with his siblings did become strained over time. Hitler's father, Alois Hitler, seemed to be a rather cold man who originally neglected Hitler and poured his affection upon Hitler's older brother, Alois Hitler Jr. Clara Hitler, however, eventually warped Alois Hitler's mind into doing her agenda and pouring the affection upon Adolf Hitler. Clara Hitler would die from breast cancer in 1907. Hitler became overly mournful and depressed. The factors of his mother's death, his temporal blindness from chlorine gas during World War I, and his failure as an artist would lead Hitler to begin to search for someone or something to blame for his misery. Hitler began to swear that it was the communists and the Jews who were the cause of all of his faults and all of the world's faults. After World War I, since Hitler needed an income and his career in the art world had failed after being refused twice from the art college, Hitler was employed by the German army to spy on the German Workers' Party. After investigating the German Workers' Party, Hitler discovered three things. Firstly, that he agreed with the ideology and politics of the German Workers' Party. Secondly, even though his party was small, Hitler saw potential in it. He realized that if he got a prominent role now in that party, that in the future as it grew, he'd be able to control the leadership and direction of the party. Thirdly, Hitler realized when he began to be a part of the party and speak that he had a knack for public speaking. From 1925 to 1929, Hitler, after being released from prison, and the Nazi Party desperately tried to get seats, or at least more seats, in the Reichstag, or German parliament. It was in 1930 and 1932, however, that the Nazi Party had its breakthrough, due to the Great Depression. The German people were desperate and no longer wanted economic insecurity. The Nazis, however, only had a minority, and Hitler wasn't president. So in 1932, he attempted to become president through political and through terrorizing means behind the scenes. However, Hitler still did not get in as president, until later he became appointed chancellor due to the previous chancellor's government failing. They figured that even though they had made Hitler chancellor, if they had a coalition government composed of every party but the Nazi Party, they would be able to control him. They were wrong. Hitler had other plans. He maneuvered around the legal system in various ways, so that eventually he was able to completely change the constitution and eventually become not only chancellor but president, and combined the two roles so that he became what he called the Führer. When the Nazis came to power in Germany, Hans and Sophie were only teenagers. It was during this time that they joined the local Nazi and Hitler groups. However, over time, Hans and Sophie both realized how corrupt the Nazi regime was. Sophie was remembered for being a quiet, very serious woman. Her father said that she was wise beyond her years, yet at the same time she was remembered by many for looking a lot more youthful than she was. Hans, on the other hand, was a handsome and bold man. He firsthand was forced into the war and realized the tragedy of the Nazi regime and what they were doing. Christoph Probst was a university student at the University of Munich who met Hans Scholl there. Both were medical students and many times were called up as medics. Witnessing the war firsthand, both Christoph and Hans vowed that they would get the attention of youth as to what the Nazi regime was truly doing. Both were heavily involved in the drafting and writing of the White Rose pamphlets. The birth of the White Rose was in 1942, comprising originally of mainly university students and friends from the University of Munich. Many members that we remember today include Hans and Sophie Scholl, Christoph Probst, Willy Graf, Alexander Schmorl, and Falk Harnack. Eventually, near the ending of the time of the White Rose, they realized that they needed someone who was scholarly for help. Good thing they had Dr. Kurt Huber. He was a professor at the University of Munich. He was very conservative and he strongly voiced his opinions. Thus, they eventually called upon him to help them with their White Rose pamphlets in the draft. A lot of the White Rose movement's inspiration for their peaceful protests came from the American Civil Rights Movement. After seeing that there were people in the U.S. protesting the wrong and racial Jim Crow laws, it gave these German students inspiration to speak up against the Nazi regime. The main form of protest done by the White Rose was by distributing and publishing pamphlets. These pamphlets were originally mailed to various universities by looking at phone books and seeing where students and key people in universities lived. However, over time it became far more youth-focused, seeing that the youth would be the future generations of Germany. The pamphlets were 6 in total, and over time became far more harsh. They drew attention to what the Nazis were doing, such as the Jewish discrimination, the euthanasia of less desired people, and many other unjust problems. Of course, where there are two opposing forces, there will always be a clash. For the 6th pamphlet, Hans and Sophie Scholl decided to take a different approach. They weren't going to mail it anymore. They were going to pass them out secretly in the University of Munich. So they started placing them all kinds of random spots between classes. However, they realized they had some extra pamphlets. Thus, when they were on top of the balcony, they threw them onto the floor below, and a janitor spotted them. The suitcase that Hans and Sophie Scholl were carrying around would help the Gestapo convict them of being a part of the activities in the White Rose group, seeing that when they stuffed all the pamphlets back into the suitcase, they fit in perfectly. They were interrogated, and apparently even a bit brutally, although Robert Moore did have sympathy on Sophie, Robert Moore being the person that interrogated Sophie. He tried to give her a way out of the scenario, a way to at least have a more lenient punishment. He told her that she should say, because she's young, that her brother was the one that confused her in this entire mess. However, Sophie instead bluntly stated that she was fully aware of the actions she made, and that whatever punishment her brother got, she did not want a more lenient punishment, even if that meant death. A draft for a 7th pamphlet was given to Hans. Hans ripped it up. However, they matched the handwriting back to Christoph and arrested Christoph as well. Within days, the People Court came into session, and Sophie, Hans, and Christoph all had to face the notorious judge Roland Friesler. He was more like an attorney than a judge, and was known for screaming and shrieking and yelling and ranting off. Of course, it was no different for Sophie, Hans, or Christoph when Friesler gave them their court case. Friesler, of course, said that Hans, Sophie, and Christoph were all guilty and all deserved death. On the afternoon of February 22nd, at 5 o'clock, Sophie, Hans, and Christoph were all beheaded. However, they did not go to their deaths afraid. Each one of them was calm, ready, and prepared. They were so calm that the guards were moved by them and stirred to break the rules, such as let Hans and Sophie meet with their parents before their death and give Christoph the chance to meet with a priest and be baptized before he died. Unlike Sophie Scholl, who took responsibility for her actions in the White Rose and was willing to accept death even for it, Hitler would never accept blame. Further, he would go on to put the blame on someone else, even if they had no relation to the problem or were not guilty. Thus he was able to start his racial discrimination, his social discrimination, and his political and religious discrimination. These people groups that he didn't like and that he discriminated, he had a few methods: concentration camps, death camps, execution, war, and trying to conquer areas and lands that he felt that he should have, especially if they had a strong German population, and eugenics, or selective breedings. Unfortunately, the Scholls and Probst were not the only members of the White Rose to be executed for their actions. Willy Graf, Alexander Schmorl, and Dr. Kurt Huber were all killed for their actions in the White Rose and executed. Hitler, in the ending, realizing that he had failed, committed suicide cowardly. The story of the White Rose serves us as a reminder that if we want justice and righteousness, then we must be willing to make a sacrifice. The story of the White Rose in the end of World War II went on to encourage and inspire many people in Europe and the US.